Hi everyone, welcome to the second part of All About Specializations. My name is Tony Xavier and I'm the Chief Learning Officer of IMS. In the first part of this video, we discussed why you should choose your specializations right now. That was one. The second part, we went into in-depth details of marketing and finance and what sort of a resume do you need for that. In this video, we'll cover the remaining specializations, which is operations, IT, HR, as well as general management and management consulting. And in the end, I'll give you a small to-do list, what you can start doing way before you join your MBA. Yeah. So the first specialization, operations. Now, operations involves every single thing, right from the sourcing of raw materials to customer service, processing the returns. So any company in anywhere in the world doing any sort of a product or service, operations is the absolute core of it. Right? So while traditionally operations has meant manufacturing jobs in, say, a setup like in any sort of a manufacturing setup, it can be automobile manufacturing or it can even be FMCG manufacturing. Now we know that the great number of operations jobs also lie in all the e-commerce firms, starting with Amazon to like all the other firms that are there, right, from delivery services and everything, right? So operations is that end-to-end part of your business where you can be taking up any role. Right? And for any company, we know that the success lies in the operations, the quality of your product and the quality of your service. So that way, if you look at it, operations in a way is a very, very generalist field in the sense that you need not be working in one specific domain or industry. You can shift from sector to sector. You can start your career in manufacturing or automobile, and then you can be working on Amazon, and then maybe you can be working in Starbucks as well, right? An entire range of services. It depends on a particular mindset and a particular kind of what you call background that is required for it. Right? So to give you an example, even in a service firm like Starbucks is like a very, very big case study at IMA, where they say the case study's title actually goes that the coffee is maybe not that great, but the service is fantastic. So, and I witnessed it firsthand because I used to visit it regularly because it was right when I was working with IMS Pune. It was right next to the IMS Pune center on FC Road. So before starting work, I would go there, pick up a coffee and then go to work. And because of this regular visits and because of obviously the MBA mindset, I started noticing things that they do absolutely fantastically. So the first thing is, Starbucks was not my first choice because Starbucks is slightly expensive and stuff. So my first choice was, because back in the day it just had come in and I was like, okay, there were other options that were better. My first option was to go into another brand. I went to a coffee day close by, and the person at the counter, I understand Hindi very well and stuff, and the person was speaking a mix of Marathi and Hindi and speaking so fast, I could not understand a single word that the person was saying. And the way the staff were behaving and everything, I didn't really like it. And after that, I just went to Starbucks. And once I went to Starbucks, I saw that there were a series of differences that I saw. The first thing was that, one, while the staff might be friendly with each other, they won't engage in direct joking and laughing and banter in front of you. They will have a pleasant relationship with each other, but they won't be behaving as if it's their backyard and they're having a lot of fun. That was fun. Second thing is, whether they are working or whether they are outside of their shift, the focus on the consumer is always there. So, for example, one of the staff has finished their shift and they're walking out in their regular clothes. They're not even in the Starbucks uniform. But if they see you, they will look at you, smile and wish you. Right? So that was one thing. The next thing is, I saw that all the staff members, they try to, when they write down the names, if you're a regular, the whole idea was that there should be a place away from home or an office away from office, a home away from home or office away from office. There's this concept of third place. Apart from your office and your work, is there a third place where you like to go, sit, read, sketch, or even work, from a cafe sort of a situation, right? So Starbucks was the original idea in wanting to become that space. So how does it become that space? If you feel that there is a connection. So one of the ways they do it is, each of the baristas, they try to remember your name. So I remember, and these baristas get shifted across different outlets as well, if I'm not wrong. So I remember one guy, after a long time, he had come back to that particular outlet, and when I used to go every day. So when he saw me, he's like, so wait a minute, let me just try to remember your name. Just a minute, don't, give me some time. And he finally remembered it and he told me my name. So it's an effort on their part to do that. Technically, they don't need to, do that, right? So I've seen that across the board every single time to generate that service. Now, how does this happen? It starts with a great deal of training as well for each of your employees, and to ensure that defining what your service elements are properly and executing what those service elements are, and also empowering your people at the front end who are doing what you're doing. For example, in online companies where there is a lot of customer service and returns, the big companies, they really empower their staff. At the end, they won't say, okay, I have to speak to my boss and get back if you need or my seniors to find out if we can give you a refund. They give them the authority that based on these principles, if you feel this is right, go ahead to the refund, right? So that's how they work here. Whether it's a product company or a service company, operations is the backbone of a company, right? So how do you start? You start in any one of the divisions. You start in any one of the divisions. It can be sourcing, it can be manufacturing, it can be quality control, it can be customer service. Any one of the divisions can be where you start. And from there, you rise up to handle a group of functions, right? So, and eventually chief operating officer. And after that, you can get to become the CEO. As I said, there is no reason for you to be stuck to one domain. You can move across domains. A student of mine, he started with working with NTPC, 4 years in operations, hardcore in terms of in the power sector and operations. After his MBA from SPJN, he joined Amazon, he joined P&G, he joined Procter & Gamble, and he was working in their factory. 2-3 years, then he moved to Amazon. Right? So if you see, it gives you flexibility. It's not as if you are stuck in one particular center. And as I said, as you rise across the ranks, Chief Operating Officer is the first designation, but there are enough and more cases of after that operations people moving on to becoming the CEOs of companies. Right? Now, for this particular profile, if you see, what becomes the kind of resume that people will be looking at? So the first important thing is academic profile. Is it important? Yes. It's not very important that you need to become a 9-pointer or a topper of the batch or anything. But because operations involves a fairly decent amount of process orientation as well as optimization and stuff, so they need somebody with a fairly decent academic profile and academic aptitude, right? So they would look at decent academics, not necessarily say out of 10, but they would look at somebody with a 7.5 sort of this thing. So that is a must. Second thing, academic pedigree. Is it important? Pedigree in terms of, say, being from an IIT or an IIT, that's a bonus. It's not necessarily important. It's not important like it's in finance or like it's in consulting. So that's not an important factor at all. But the most important thing becomes educational background. Right? People with an engineering background are the first people to have, to get into operations, because that systems-oriented thinking is absolutely important. More so, people with mechanical engineering tend to get it. So it's a chicken and egg story. It is not that they want engineers, but more mechanical engineers end up choosing operations. So it's not as if they want only mechanical engineers as such. Anybody you might be an electronics engineer who's working in a electronic instruments manufacturing firm, that is also fine, right? So professional degree, not as such, not important, but the most important thing is work experience, right? Because operations is about manufacturing, it's about, even in service industry, it's about being there on the ground. A person who's not worked in operations cannot directly get into handling the vast number of people as well as designing systems. So imagine you've not worked on a shop floor ever, and then you're getting into operations in terms of in the production side or a quality control side. Not possible, because these people, the people who work in operations on the floor in the service, are also people very different from, say, not all of them will be MBAs. So your hardcore experience of working in the ground is important. To illustrate this, SPJN chooses people for specific disciplines of those who are into operations. Everybody, almost all students in a batch of 60, barring 1 or 2, will be people with 2 to 3 years of work experience. Minimum 2, the sweet spot is 3, right? I've known, say, the odd engineer, mechanical engineer with exceptional marks who would have got through, but out of 60, that is 1, or in some cases 2, that's about it. So work experience is an absolute must for getting into operations, because without having worked on the ground, that doesn't, you won't get any idea as to how to manage a whole scale of things, because any small thing goes wrong, any small people management issue goes wrong, you cannot take a chance with that, which is why people with work experience are taken. Right? Extracurricular activities not really important, singing, dancing, sports, they don't really care much about that. Positions of responsibility, if you've had, that is a bonus, right? So the key thing for operations, if you ask me to do, would be having a relevant educational background, work ex, and above average academics. So these would be the 3 key requirements for a operations resume. Right? Now, how do you understand, is it something that, for you? One, if you realize operations involves, say, in an automobile, to manufacture a car, the number of spare parts that come from completely different vendors, across the across so many different vendors. The big brands only assemble stuff, right? So operations, one big thing is that raw materials come from one place, somebody else is maybe giving you the packaging, you are doing the assembly, and then there is quality control. Your ability to everybody needs to manage multiple teams, multiple locations and stuff. But here, that ability becomes even more complicated, even more, complex than, say, any other department, right? So, ability to manage multiple teams, different locations, functions, and organizations, absolutely, that is important. Those who have an engineering mindset and like to build systems and processes. Operations are about, say, this machine running flawlessly and never stopping. So every single piece of planning, right from before you install the machine to what happens if something goes wrong, you cannot take anything for granted. So those who have a process-oriented thinking, those who have a systems-building mindset, those who have that approach, for you, operations is definitely something that you need to do. You look at anything, you immediately convert it into a process, and that is what is required. Ability to handle pressure and a love for pressure. Now, this depends upon which sector. So I met somebody who was working in a manufacturing setup in a very, very large MNC, and they're like, sir, the factory is so completely set now. Almost like I'm on autopilot, there is barely anything to do because everything is set. But at the same time, if you move to operations in a logistics firm or an e-commerce firm, it will be a completely different ball game altogether. All said and done, there will be a certain amount of pressure depending upon the kind of sector you're working in. And think about it. Even in, say, something like our industry, where I'm part of, we have in a place like in a city like Bombay, we have multiple batches running across the city, and we have so many sets of teachers as well. Some of them are full-timers, bulk of them are part-timers. How do we ensure that not a single class gets cancelled? Somebody can fall ill at some point of time, there can be a rain, class can get delayed, right? So it is always a high pressure situation. It's not necessarily a low pressure situation in terms of handling everything. And the pandemic was the biggest example. In the pandemic, the biggest thing that got affected was supply chain. And the people who had to work overnight completely were the tech teams as well as the ops teams, right? Another big important thing is that ability to constantly optimize and find the best solution. Something is set does not mean it's fine, because operations marketing contributes to the top line or revenue of a company. Operations contributes to the bottom line of profit of a company. So you're constantly trying to look at, okay, can I find a different vendor who will do this cheap? Is there some amount of automation that I can do to reduce the cost of manufacturing? So you're constantly looking to optimize. So those who have this mindset to optimize and find the best solution, they will tend to do much better in operations, right? So that is what operations is about. In engineering and a systems mindset, constant desire to optimize, ability to handle multiple teams across this thing and handle pressure. So if that is what you're looking at, then operations is for you, right? And we've looked at the resume as well, what kind of resume is required. So more or less compared to other say domains, operations, there's a kind of self-selection in the sense that you need to be an engineer, you need to have work experience. So only then, relevant work experience, not any work experience, hardcore operations work experience. So there the pool becomes naturally self-selected as well, right? So a few of my students, they've done different roles. So one person was working in quality control in Hyundai. From that, he went to IIM Lucknow and he moved on to something else, right? Another student moved on from operations was working in Ashok Leyland in operations. But after an ISB degree, he went on to the sales side of things. So operations, you have an operations background doesn't mean that you can't go to other backgrounds. You can still switch to other backgrounds or even to other degrees. We'll talk about that, other specializations, we'll talk about that later, right? So that's operations, and from operations, we move to the next one, which is IT and tech. What's IT and tech? Handling the business side of IT and technology firms, right? So one part is the development and the coding side of things. The entirely other part is the business and the operations side of things, right? So that is where the MBAs come into the picture in terms of the business and the operations side of any large IT firm, which is IT services firms, or even a technology firm. How are these two different, and what are the roles that you'll start with? If you look at your MBA in IT and tech, one of the core roles on the sales side is, say, pre-sales and business development. In pre-sales and business development, what do you do? So if you have IT companies that are offering a whole load of services, these services are across sectors. It can be banking, it can be telecom, it can be retail, entire different verticals. And then you have different geographies: Asia, South America, North America, Europe, Africa. You have all geographies. Now, how do you increase business? When you keep ticking these check boxes, when you have a particular vertical and you're present in more than one geography, or in one geography you're present in more than one vertical, that is the tick box that happens, right? Which is why most of the sales and pre-sales and business development people, they tend to be focused outside, or they tend to move abroad in terms of their roles, because that's where all the clients are, right? So a student of mine a few years back, so now with remote work, I'm not very sure how much of that is there, but still a fairly large chunk of people will be there, because business and pre-sales cannot, usually happens with, say, in-person, interaction, right? So a student of mine was working in, I think he was working in, was an engineer from a regular college in Chennai, and after that for 3 years he was working with CTS, if I'm not wrong. So after CTS he went into IIM Bangalore, and then after Bangalore, within IT, he chose to get into HCL. He said I wanted to get into HCL because in HCL, the sales pitch that is done, the MBA doesn't just do the sales pitch, but also the product and the technical side of the pitch. So he felt that, okay, I'd like to do both, so which is why I got into that. After his MBA, he came to me, and this was, say, immediately a month or so later. So, and then, after 1 month, he was immediately sent to Sweden, because that's where the client was. The client was there. So he worked in Europe for a while, because being there and working with the client and trying to get new businesses and stuff. And after that, he moved to the US, right? So entire pre-sales, and so when you talk about sales, it also can get into, say, account management as well, and IT consulting as well. All of these things become very, very important roles. So in sales, it's completely you're only dealing with getting the clients, and the rest of the part is handled by the other team, right? Business analyst, project management, IT consulting, these people come into play once the project starts. Right? Once the project starts, you need to figure out, or just before presenting a proposal to possible vendors, you have to look at, okay, what are the requirements? How many people do we require? If so many people are required, then what is the kind of costing that we can do for that? And after the project starts, the entire project management bit. Because on one side, you have the clients who have problems, and other side, you have your developers, right? The project management and the consulting team, their main job in the middle is to understand exactly the needs of the client, figure out the right kind of solution, and ensure that his whole execution is on track and none of the deadlines are missed, and any sort of things keep constantly changing as well. They are the people who are running the whole show from the tech side, right? And interacting and front-facing with the client, right? So most of the people will be getting into consulting, operations, and project management sort of a thing once you do your MBA. Some people might purely want to get into business development and sales, they get into that. So that's the IT services part of it. The next part is product management. Product management are where in companies, tech companies, where it's not a service but a product. So Google, Gmail is a product, right? Microsoft Words is a product, or Teams is a product. The job of the product management team, you're the custodian of the product. So you're looking at, okay, what is the customer's feedback? Are there features that need to be improved? What are the small things that can be added on a year-to-year basis? How do we price this product? How do we bundle this product? So you become the custodian of the product, who is going to decide how this product is going to face the market in terms of pricing and everything else. And you're also going to take feedback from the market, look at what can be done, and work on the product to keep improving that. So product management is not very, very different from, say, a marketing a role that we discussed in the previous video entirely about, say, the marketing roles that are there, not sales but marketing. But here it is for a technology product. Right. So that is what. So you work here, And then you might be rising to handle a particular vertical or a particular geography. So you might be heading the whole banking sector or the telecom sector, or you might be handling an entire geography like Europe or North America or whatever, right? So that's how you handle, right? And after that, you grow to become COO, CTO, what are all the C-level roles within a firm. And of course, after that, the CEO within the firm, right? So operations and scale of IT companies are huge. India's largest companies, TCS is one of the largest companies, in India. So the scale of operations is huge, and the geography is also very, very huge. So it's a very, very different sort of a sector if you need to work. You might have one idea of it from what you are doing currently, which is working as a developer, or most people in India, there is a particular TG which is the core TG in terms of a B school as well, which they want to increase diversity and want to take other people, but it's the engineers who are working in IT, right? So that's the typical. So you might have one view of it, right? But that view should not limit you from saying, I want to leave IT and go after something else. I don't think it is required, or it should be taken in haste, that particular part, based on your experience right now. Because technology as a space is a very, very vast space, right? And there is enough scope for those with IT work experience or tech work experience to add an MBA and build a great career in the technology space at large, right? So that's the career in terms of IT and tech. Now, if you look at this, what is required in terms of a resume? Academic profile, if you ask me to be very, very honest, the person who will have the easy, because B school, you hear, stories that the B school, you don't get time to sleep, life is very, very hectic, so many projects, so much to study. If there is one profile that doesn't need to do anything, can go to a business school and have a lot of fun for 2 years, it would be somebody who wants to build their career in IT. Because if you look at it, just like IT companies recruit in large numbers at an engineering level, the same thing is the case even at a management level as well, right? And because it is not finance or marketing or consulting, the competition for these jobs is not very huge, and saying that a whole batch is not running after these jobs. So given that academic profile important? No. Academic pedigree important? No. Education background, typically being an engineer, is important, or if you're not an engineer, if you have a BCA or an MCA degree, that also works, right? Professional degree, not important. Work experience is pretty important, as I said, because until you've worked in IT projects, you've seen how IT projects are executed, getting those management roles later is difficult. So back in the day when I was graduating, the IT sector wasn't this big, where everybody, there were so many people with work ex. That number was small. So there were quite a few of my batchmates who were freshers also who got through, who got into these jobs. But that's not the case right now, because the IT sector is very, very huge, and so many people have those jobs. So work ex becomes very important. Without work ex, getting into project management, pre-sales and all doesn't work. Extracurriculars, not really important. Positions of responsibility, it's a bonus. Honestly, even that I can say is not important. So basically, whatever your resume is before an MBA, same resume even during an MBA and after is fine, right? So you can go to a B school and chill for a couple of years, have a great time, and get into your dream tech or IT job and come out, right? So that's one of the benefits, of choosing this particular sector. Who is it for? If you have good work experience in IT, you love tech and want to be in the technology space, and I put that in brackets because it's not necessarily like the most important criteria, but if you want to relocate abroad, this is also not a bad idea, because most of the Indian IT space, the world outsources their technology work to us. And as I said, most of the big clients are abroad. So you look at, say, people working abroad with online working and everything else, and remote working, things have changed. But still, there is compared to the other domains, it's easier to relocate abroad through this, right? So is IT and tech for you? That's a call that you'd have to take based on what I've discussed so far. So now that we're done with IT, what's the next one? Human resources. Now, human resources management is about designing and executing the people strategy at a firm. right? So the people strategy at a firm, it might seem like, so what is there? It's not a big deal. But if you look at the biggest companies in the world, they are so successful because they have super strong human resources management. That is exactly where they do a lot of investment. What are the biggest, most successful places to work in? Google, Amazon. These are absolutely, but Google, it will not, Amazon is to this thing, but Google for the longest time was the most sought after company to work with, right? In all of these companies, the most toughest thing is the recruitment process. It won't be a simple one-round interview. It is always multiple rounds. Google, for example, one of my friends, a super sharp guy from one of the IITs, after college, he cleared all the rounds. It wasn't very difficult for him. But in the last round, they had a round called culture, where they checked for the culture. And they said, yeah, this person is not a culture fit, and they rejected him, right? So that is how seriously they take it. They can be a super smart IITian, but if they feel that you're not a culture fit, they won't. Then other case, in Amazon, for example, my best friend with a lot of work experience, a few years ago, applied to Amazon, and they made him still go through the whole process. He got through, but they made him go through the whole process where they gave him a case study, and he had to do a handwritten analysis of that case study. So their process, they will follow in a super serious way, right, in terms of what they do. So international firms and the biggest firms in the world, they place a huge importance on their selection process, because they know that if they've selected the right person, then bulk of the job is done for them in terms of generating long-term value out of that employee. So my best friend, after he got into Amazon, there was a personal tragedy. His father passed away, all of a sudden. And then he had to take a break for 6 months because there were many things to sort out. Now, an Indian firm would say, hey, we want you to join right now. You're saying you'll join after 6 months. Sorry, sorry, we can't do anything. It's unfortunate, but unfortunately, the role won't be open anymore. Amazon took it very differently. They're like, okay, this person has cleared our process, right? So that means we have invested a lot of time in recruiting this person and getting this person into the system, right? And he's definitely Amazon material, because they're looking at an IIM grad with a lot of work experience and stuff, right? So they said, hey, it's fine. You take your 6 months. This exact role might or might not be there, but we'll work something out. Let's see how things stand then. But, they said, come back and join after 6 months. And he hadn't even joined the firm. He only got the offer. And between that, this happened. And he went ahead and joined them after 6 months and work with them, after that, right? So you see the biggest importance that they place on, recruitment. After recruitment, the next most important thing is culture, right? People, the work culture of an organization determines a lot whether the kind of place it is and how people work and everything. For example, Google and all, earlier it was office, but I think Google started this word called campus, right? So it's not an office, campus. Why campus? Because they wanted the brightest people in the world, which they're selecting from the best campuses, to feel that the campus, it's an extension of their campus life. So it does not go with just putting a name. You can call something campus, but something can still feel like an office. So what do? One of the big things in campus is what? Do you need to cook on a campus? No, there is a canteen. So similarly at Google, they have like a huge cafeteria with different kinds of food. So you don't need to bother about cooking, right? Another thing in campus is what? You can play enough and more facilities for sports. So in the Google offices, there are enough and more facilities for sports as well, right? So what happens now is that you don't need to, suppose you're a youngster who's joined them, and you know that the breakfast is there, free food is there round the clock, you know that there are enough and more games to play. Would you be tempted to go back home, or would you be tempted to stay back in the evening, work some more and eat food there? You'll eat food there. But you might say, sir, but I can only eat food and not work and play. But Google will take an entire set of people who are the most driven people. That is why the culture fit comes in. So do they need to measure when you're coming in, when you're going out, how many hours did you work? They're not bothered about that, right? They've given you a lot of work. They've created a competitive environment, and they've selected also people who are very, very driven. And they've given all the facilities for you to stay in office. What will happen? You will end up staying in office for a very, very long time, right? So that's how companies create that culture also within a particular thing. Culture becomes very, very important. So we might think of HR in a particular way. If you look at the international firms, they succeed because of that. The third part that is there after that is talent management, right? So talent management, you have a lot of people. How do you identify these people, and how do you over a longer term maximize the leadership potential among them, right? So another friend of mine who was in HR was working in a lot of what you call in a very in a international firm, and he had reached a particular level, and after that it was time for him to take on a more global role, right? So they set up a mentorship with him with somebody in the US, and that person coordinated the time and everything else to groom him and mentor him. That person didn't say, okay, somebody is there, somebody has given me this job, I should tell something to this guy. No, because they're looking at every employee's lifetime value, those who have potential. So talent management becomes a very important part of this whole thing. So typically, what is the career path? Everybody starts in recruitment, right? You start with recruitment, so you might be the person who's going to campus to recruit, doing the mass recruitment where in large number of in large numbers, right? Throughout your career, you will be doing recruitment at some level or the other. You might not be doing recruitment at all the junior levels and large scale levels, but you still will be handling or managing recruitment even though you're not doing it directly. So as you're growing up the ladder in HR, you will be handling recruitment for only senior positions. Like for example, at this friend in HR, mine, so he was like, at one point of time, he was like, yeah, I don't do mass recruitment anymore. Only his peers, or, he was, recruiting his boss, right? So, because his boss had quit. So, he's only looking at people at a very senior, level. So, recruitment you have to do throughout this. The other phases, as you're growing, you go through handling compensation management, training and development. Organization design becomes very important. Who reports to whom, and how does this work? And eventually you grow to become the chief people officer, right? So, or the CHRO, chief human resource officer, or head of HR. These are various designations. Now, one of the things with HR is the rise to CEO is not possible, because HR is not a line function, but it becomes a support function. So because if you've not for your whole career, and we also know that the HR degrees and courses are separate, which is why the best HR programs are specialized programs, right? Nobody goes to an IIM Ahmedabad to recruit for HR because they know that they don't have enough electives and subjects for that. The best college for that is XLRI, right? So HR courses are also specialized, and people work in a very niche field, because of which you know that if you have not managed product, if you have not handled business up front, there is no way you can get into the CEO level, right? So typically HR, the growth stops at a CHRO level, right? Now for this, what kind of profile is required if you need to handle all of these things? Academic profile, really great marks, they're not really looking at that. Academic pedigree, that you should be from a IIT, NIT, or any top college, not necessarily. Education background, or technically if you see, there is no specific background. Yeah, people who've done a course in psychology or arts or something, you might think that they will know a bit more about human behavior and all of that. Yes, so that relevant education background is a bonus. But because there won't be those many people who've done those courses, it is not a must, but it's a bonus, right? How many people who are in a B school would have, in an HR program, would have done a psychology course? Not that many. So which is why the companies would say that is a bonus, it's not a must, right? You can be an engineer, you can be from any other discipline, and you can go, right? Professional degree, not important. Work experience, if you worked in HR, definitely a bonus. So you see that what I've spoken about in terms of, say, recruitment, understanding people and everything else. So extracurricular activities, in terms of the profile requirement, in terms of skills and traits, they're closer to the skills and traits required for marketing, right? If you're recruiting, anything that you're doing in HR, if suppose as an area sales manager, you might be handling only a particular area, you might be handling West, you might or might not be handling South, you handle another area, and then after that you might be given a national role or whatever, right? But in HR, right from the get-go, you're recruiting for the whole country, right? So your ability to actually establish a connection with anybody from across the country, and you're also recruiting for different profiles, right? You're recruiting for different departments. Every department has a different need. So to be an all-rounder who can understand different requirements and connect with different kind of people, that is like a huge skill to have, which is why they look at it through the same thing as marketing. If you have had a lot of positions of responsibility and you've had a lot of extracurricular activities and you have an extroverted personality, that goes a long way in terms of looking at a resume for HR. Which is why if you look at HR, the most important things are ECS and positions of responsibility. The rest of the things are not very, very important. How do you choose whether it is for you or it is not for you? Because not everybody naturally will know this. So if you feel that you have a great ability to connect with people from different backgrounds, this see in every what you call domain, be it marketing or finance or operations, you need this ability. But as I discussed in HR, you need this ability to be an outsized ability. Right? So, for example, in T20, everybody needs to score fast. But the person who's coming in as a finisher or as a hitter, that person needs to have an outsized ability to score fast. Right? Similarly, HR, people skills and forging connection is very, very important. Not just people skills and forging a connection. One important thing for HR is that HR is the first person that people will be talking to. HR is the last person that people will be talking to. Right? So, in another discipline, in any other field, you can have great people skills, right? You can be an extrovert, great communication skills, but you need not necessarily always be a great listener, right? But in HR, you need to be a great listener. People come to you for everything, right? So a genuine empathy for people and patience to listen to them is very, very important. Right? The ability to be always pleasant under any circumstances. In marketing and other fields or even operations, every other field, people maybe have the luxury, right, in a stressful situation or a tense situation to get angry, lose their cool and everything. Is it possible for you to lose your cool in HR? Absolutely not, not even none. Right? So if you look at the amount of stress, it's a different kind of stress. For you to be always pleasant, it's not easy. It's not easy to be always pleasant and always calm and always put the other person before yourself, right? That is not easy. So that's a huge, if you feel you have those skill sets, then it's a wonderful profession to be in. Right? Is HR, what about pressure in HR? So I've heard that, what about pressure in HR? Is it less than in other fields or whatever? Now, HR has a different kind of pressure. In other fields, you might have a monthly pressure to say meet sales and revenue and those things. So the pressure is completely on the financial side in terms of generating revenue, generating profits. In HR, the pressure is different. All of a sudden, whenever the firm wants to scale, the pressure is from recruitment. But it need not be a monthly pressure with a gun to your head. But if I look at my friends in HR and my friends in marketing, will I say that one person has an easier job? No. In terms of purely the quantum of work done, the amount of travel that they have to do, I don't see too much of a change. It's just that maybe the monthly sales and financial pressures might not be there. But there are different kind of pressures. My one of the two best friends, and by now you would know that one is in marketing and one is in HR. So you guys should have figured that out by now. So the one in HR, he was working with a very, very major international, with an American firm. And the American firm got acquired by a huge European firm, the biggest, huge Fortune 500 company in a M&A deal. Now, what happens in a mergers and acquisitions deal, right? Where is the profit generation coming from in an M&A deal? Operations get merged. That means many people have to be let go of. But that is not easy pressure to handle. It is crazy pressure to handle, right? So these things are also there. It's a very, very different kind of pressure to handle. So people think that HR is an easy job. It's because you don't not responsible for sales or business. Absolutely not. It is very, very taxing in a different way, where you have to be nice to people. You're the person who has to be nice to people, welcoming to people, always be pleasant, always put them first. But you're also the person who's breaking the bad news to people. Another important thing in HR is that you don't necessarily need to develop an industry specialization that I'll work only in this field or only in that field. You can easily move, the best jobs can be in different sectors, so you can actually move. Your ability to adapt to different sectors is crucial, right? Because nobody is actually looking for, and nobody decides, okay, I want only this sort of it happens maybe for IT, where they would want somebody who's recruited previously for IT. But otherwise, and across all industries, they're looking at people from they just want the right person not necessarily a person from a particular industry, right? So ability to strategically adapt to different industries, that is very, very important, right? So HR as a field, that is the whole summary in terms of it is demanding, but in very, very different ways. So you have to figure out, is this the role for you or not, right? The next one. Now we've discussed all the standard specializations that are there: marketing, finance, operations, IT, and HR, right? These are the specializations that are offered also within an IIM, right? Or some of them, like in the case of say IT, or especially in the case of HR, they are specialized degrees as well, right? But there are specializations or domains, or say people take up multiple specializations, for example, to work in a specific kind of role. So what are those? First one is general management. What is general management? These general management roles, they're not too many, very few, but leadership roles across many firms and large conglomerates. So you have companies like the Tata Group, right? You have the Aditya Birla Group, you have the Hinduja Group. These are conglomerates which have companies in different sectors. Aditya Birla Group will have an insurance company, will have a cement company, will have a fashion company, right? So many different groups. And they will be recruiting MBAs for each of these. They'll be taking a finance grad for maybe their insurance or financial services. This thing, they'll be taking a marketing grad to look at somebody for their fashion division. They'll be taking people across different disciplines. So that doesn't change. Your entry into the organization is the same like in any other this thing. You're recruited for the Tata Administrative Services, right? Which is that's what you're recruited for. But your first job might be with Tanishq, or it might be with Tata Steel. It might be in Tanishq in marketing. It might be in Tata Steel in operations, right? Same thing. But what are they looking for? Why is this different? Because over a period of time, they are looking at you taking up leadership roles across all of these firms. These companies, this is a single group which has so many companies. How does it ensure that across all of these companies, the same culture and the same values are present, and also they have a talent pool of generating people, they're generating a talent pool to develop a top management later. Everybody who joins need not remain till the end to take up this thing. So while you might join in one area and in one, so you might be joining in the fashion division in marketing, but later you might be given the chance to become the ops head or the CEO of another other sector as well, right? Or you might be called to the corporate office, right? So essentially you're looked at as a company leadership resource. You might start with HR also in one particular field, but then later you might go on to a conglomerate. So that is what general management is about, where they're looking at recruiting people for regular roles only with respect to start with, like in marketing, finance, this thing. But over a period of time, they become the core talent pool for leadership across the group. So you start in one domain or industry and you move across domains and industries as per the conglomerate's need. So if you are, say, the brand manager in one particular area and they have a need elsewhere, or they have some other special project or whatever, while you're always working there, you can any point of time get a call from the corporate office saying, hey, there is a requirement here and we think you are the best person to take that up and lead, right? So from there, you go on to either become the CXO or the CEO, or even head on to the corporate office as part of the conglomerates in a corporate office, because there will be a corporate office and there will be all the rest of the companies as well, right? Corporate office is the group that sits, the head office of the whole, of the whole conglomerate, right? So this is the kind of career that you will have. If you look at this particular career, one of the things is that now based on this, if this is what they want, what do they want? They want to groom leadership over a longer term, from the people they are selecting. So what do they look at? First thing, academic profile, it becomes important. They want people who today I'm working with a fashion company in marketing, tomorrow I should be able to go to some other company and work. So your basic academic profile and your aptitude should be good. So which is why the marks should always be pretty decent. So it might not be, I said, important, because it need not be that, somebody is a 9-pointer out of 10, but definitely between a 7 to 8. That is a must. Below 7, chances are very, very tough, right? Academic pedigree, being from a good college also, because we're looking at these companies which are national level. Is it very, very important? important, not very, very important, but I would say among all the things, this is maybe slightly minor, academic pedigree, so it's okay. But it's something which, they look at. Education background. So this is one of the things they don't really look at, education background. So for marketing or for this, because they're looking at only the relevance, they're not saying only engineers required or only this thing, what you call commerce grads required or whatever. They're looking at people with all-round skills, right? Professional degree, yes. I joined the Aditya Birla group from campus, from I'm Lucknow, and when I joined that, so they had taken, so they were, for finance roles, they took CFAs and CS. So if there is a finance role and you have a CA or a CFA, absolutely that will be a bonus, right? There were freshers also like me who were recruited, and there were WorkX people also. So WorkX is a bonus, it's not a must. Since then, different companies, for example, even among these roles, general management roles, they have two tracks. One for people with freshers and one for people with WorkX. So people have different permutations and combinations, but is it a must WorkX? Not necessarily, right? Now, because they want people who will work on a longer term, who have great leadership potential and can move across industries, that again they want all-rounders. So extracurricular activities, very, very important, because they want somebody with a wide range of this thing. But more than that, they really look at positions of responsibility, because they're saying leadership, leadership, leadership. And if you're not somebody who has shown that leadership at any point, that's a bit tough to get into. So leadership ends up having a big spike on your resume if you're looking at this. For example, I had applied to the Tata Administrative Services as well. I didn't have a 7 as a CGPA. I had a CGPA around that backstory. You will know if you if you had listened to the first part of this where I spoke about my CGPA and all of that. So I didn't have a CGPA of 7. It was something like 6.93. I was 97th in the batch of 220. But despite that, I got a shortlist from the Tata Administrative Services because I was the academic secretary of the batch. Right? It was a big position of responsibility, so I got that shortlist. Right? So they're looking at people with good with above average academics, decent academic profile, good extracurricular activities, and absolutely important positions of responsibility. Right. So if I take in terms of the profile importance and of all things, so if I put say finance and consulting at the highest, maybe consulting at the highest, because consulting was all-rounders. So if consulting makes the maximum demands across all boards, so then the next would be finance, and a very close third would be general management. Finance, it does not require all-rounders, unlike general management, but because the CGPA requirements are so high and the academic pedigree requirement is so high, I would say it is tougher to get so if I look at how tough is it to get a shortlist in terms of for a resume on campus, I would say management consulting and finance will be right up there. Joint number one and a close number 2 is finance. And number 3 would be general management, is what I would say. Yeah. So this is the kind of profile that they're looking at. And is it for you? Now, you can look at it this way. Is it those who want consulting without the stress of consulting, in the sense that consulting, we'll discuss consulting later. Here also you get to work in different industries. But these are not short projects that you're shifting immediately, but you're working with a company for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and then moving, right? Those who wish to work with India's biggest business houses, those who want the big Indian brands, like working with the Tata Administrative Services or working with the ABG group. So that, if that's a big draw for you, or ITC for that matter, so you should look at GenMan. Right? One of the big advantages of the general management career is that if you decide that I am going to stick and I am going to build a solid, stable career, right? That is very rewarding in the longer term, right? Because they have selected you for you to become a CEO later. That is what they want, right? So because they want that, and if you're somebody who is willing to invest time and take the long and slow and steady route, and if you're that sort of a mindset also, you're not somebody who's restless, who wants to constantly change and, you need a new cake or this, that, So if you're somebody who's, a more patient person, and you're willing to play the long race, your chances of becoming a CEO are higher through this route, right? Because you're being earmarked for the same, right? So, which is why they also look at people who exhibit old school values, right? In the sense that they want people who they feel these guys are likely to stick through. These people might not be very, very flashy, very, very, impatient, right? I saw that in the kind when, because if you look at later, it will make sense. As a youngster on campus, it didn't make sense to, it didn't, obviously not that the choice was wrong, but I didn't understand what the deeper this thing. But if I'm looking at, say, the people who got selected into the Tata Administrative Services from my batch, now it makes complete sense. Both of them exhibited old school values and they were with the firm for a very long time, if I'm not wrong, right? So general management is working with these companies, if you're talented, because nothing, and if you're good, because nothing will happen, nobody will carry you if you're not good. But if you want somewhere like the security of a government job, but with the entire challenge of a private sector company, right? And also because a challenge and the risk of a private sector, both together, because if you're not good, you will get fired. But you want to be, if you work long, then that you'll be considered for those senior roles, then GenMan is for you, right? I feel it's a good mix of both worlds, if you ask me, right? So that is what general management is all about. And only thing is that there are not too many jobs, too many roles on offer, not too many conglomerates in India. So finally, it's only 4 or 5 companies, but they do take and recruit in large numbers depending upon the recruitment. So how many GenMan roles might be there on campus? I wouldn't say too many. In a very good year, at an outer level, maybe 50, so that this thing, but not, beyond that, it will be slightly, lower than that. Yeah. So that's general management. And from general management, we'll move to the most elite or sought after job on campus. It's like it's management consulting. So you've sort of seen Matrix, or you've seen John Wick, you would have seen guys who are dressed in absolute black and white and ties and like ninjas or assassins who are there to do the job. If you ask me in one word, what is management consulting? It's exactly that. You're a management ninja, you're a management John Wick, or you're a management Neo. So that's what they want. So what is it about? It's about to provide strategic guidance to the world's leading firms. So imagine this. You have companies full of MBAs from IIMs, and then you have consulting firms who are there to give guidance to these top management. So you are there to give gyan and guidance to people who are already MBAs and are business leaders, right? So, and these companies don't just provide guidance to the leading firms. Companies like McKinsey also give guidance to governments as well, right? So they do governments. They also do, say, election strategizing for different parties as well. So, so even in India, McKinsey had helped out with the election strategies in the recent past, right? So, what does this mean? Election strategy to government advice to this thing. It means that they're looking at people who are all-rounders of a different level and problem solvers at a different level, right? So that's what we're looking at. And how do these, that way we're right at the top. Imagine giving the election strategy to a party that's contesting elections in a country. That means that you have the chance to shape the future of that country. So giving advice to governments here. Yeah. So which is why the stakes are high, and there are also negative fallouts of it. There's no point discussing that, but that is also there. The stakes are high. They operate in a very, very high stakes environment. Now, if this is the kind of role, the most elite management role that we're talking about, right? Where it's pure play management consulting, where you need to give strategic advice to the top levels of both public entities as well as private entities. What sort of skills are required? This is why I said everything. For everything else, I put very important. Here, if you see, I put very, very important. Why is it? Now, when McKinsey is consulting, with somebody, they charge a bomb in terms of money. Each consultant is charged, they charge by the hour. And if somebody is charging by the hour and they're charging a bomb, will you pay that money to anyone? Right? What will you be saying? Why do you buy an iPhone? It's by spending so much money, right? You know that there's a brand and everything else, but there's a trust that whatever you're spending, this is the best quality that you're getting. Some features here and that's separate, but this is the best quality that they're getting, right? Now, similarly, if McKinsey is coming to your government or to your company and saying, hey, this is the cost, you need to be sure it's the best, right? How do they convince you it's the best? Or they do, obviously they're not going to do it in every single tier, but how do you know it's the best? Because everyone knows that you cannot get into McKinsey unless your academic profile is exceptionally good. So you need a 999 sort of a profile. Maybe a 998 as well might work, but exceptionally good academic profile, right? Now, academic pedigree, being from an IIT, being from an NIT, being from Stephens, being from a Xavier's, being from one of India's elite colleges is very important. You might say, sir, why, sir? Suppose I'm very sharp. I have got 999, but I'm not from an IIT, but I'm from a good college. But why should I be discriminated against? Isn't it negative? Think about it. Isn't it unfair? Think about it. In a batch, almost the entire batch, I might be exaggerating when I say entire batch, everybody would want a McKinsey job, right? Everybody would want to be that management consulting ninja, right? And they have a long process of selection. Can they do that selection process for so many people? They can't, right? So in your college, so you might be somebody from not an elite college, but you have great marks. But if they need to select people from your entire cohort, from similar cohort, they need to interview maybe 50 people, out of which you might be that one person who's a gem, right? But they know that if they're going and recruiting people only from an IIT or this thing, they know for a fact that they don't need to interview as many people, right? So if it doesn't work for them, will they be doing something? No. The entire country, entire batch wants to get into a McKinsey. Not, again, I said, when I'm saying entire, there'll be enough more people who say they don't want to. So the only way for them to filter out is to say that, okay, let's make a job easier. We'll select people from, this, right? Tomorrow, if you go to an IIM, right, why do companies also come to an IIM? Because they know that the quality is great, that the people are great. Similarly, McKinsey will also say that we have so many people who want to get in, let's look at people from an IIT or an elite college. So these two become very important. Education background is not that important. They don't really differentiate that you're a commerce grad or you're an arts grad. They look at somebody with exceptional marks from the best colleges in India. That is what they want, right? Professional degree, CA, CFA, see, they want achievers, right, always. So if you are a CA, great, that is anywhere there. But if you're an engineer who's done a CFA as well, that will be a bonus. Definitely they'll look at, oh, this guy's done this also. That's definitely a bonus, right? Work experience, again, is a bonus. So professional degree and work experience are bonuses. Because they want all-rounders, extracurricular activities, positions of responsibility, those are also important. They want a person who's a complete all-rounder, right? So there is absolutely no doubt about it. Why? Why do they, want that? Sir, if I just need to give strategic advice and guidance, why do I need this? Now you have to understand that when you're going as a management consultant, even as a junior in a team, who are you dealing with? Who are you going to speak to? You're going to speak to senior people, CEOs of companies, and you don't have a lot of time because you yourself are charging money by the meter, right, by the hour. So these are your company is charging them by the hour. So obviously you have to strike up rapport and relationships with people in a very, very short span of time, right? And you need to be able to somehow lead them, work with them and then lead them as well, right? So you're working with another firm and you need to get information from them, you need to analyze stuff, you need to get information from them, right? So extracurricular activities, your personality, your people skills, all of those things become important. And so to put it in a very, very simple sentence, they want the best all-rounder. So they want somebody like a Jacques Kallis who will have maybe like a 300, 400 wickets and 10,000 runs as well. So they're not settling for anything less. So extracurriculars should include social work as well. They want people with a social work background as well, right? Now, how do you know management consulting for you? First thing, how does the career go? Why did I put, one of the important things is, this was not a slip up. In all the other slides, I put the career first, and then after that I said what the resume should look like. Here I put the resume first. There's a simple reason for that. The reason is that you don't select management consulting. Management consulting selects you, which is why you have that resume first, right? In terms of a career, you start off as a junior consultant working across industries. So wherever the project is, you do that. After that, you might develop a particular liking for a sector where you become the e-commerce specialist or a power sector specialist. You rise up the ranks to become partner or director. Another career track is after 3-4 years of working in this, You become so good that you can actually move to any sector you want. If you say I've worked with McKinsey, I don't think there will be any company in the world that will refuse or not give you an interview or won't give you a job, right? So most of my batchmates who joined McKinsey later have moved on to all the other big companies with respect to Amazon and most of other firms, right? So absolutely, what you call, which is why you're saying that this is the most elite management cadre in the world. In that sense, it's like the IAS of say management. So you can actually move into any particular sector. If you want to set up your own thing also, it definitely works. Right? Who is it for? You have to be see, one thing that is very important is you might like some things because of the glamour of something and involved. Because I also describe it like that, a John Wick or a Neo in Matrix and stuff, black suit, slim black tie and everything. That's the glamour of it. But you need to be an exceptionally high achiever, right? In a 2-month project, in a 3-month project, you're supposed to do a crazy amount of work and deliver. So they need to know, right? Like in John Wick, they know that you get the job done, right? So you're a high achiever who will get the job done every single time, right? So you need that particular capability, right? You need to have exceptionally good problem-solving skills. 2 months you're working with one company, 3 months one company, then another project, another company. So you're moving constantly and you need to solve problems in different domains. So you need to have exceptionally high problem-solving capability, which is why those case competitions, they ask questions like, okay, how many raincoats do you think are sold in India in a year? They ask you such a question in an interview. Definitely. How many raincoats are sold in India? You need to immediately think, they need to know that you have the ability or the process-oriented this thing to think. Next important thing is articulation skills. You can understand the problem and the solution, but unless you're able to explain that in a very simple format, which is why management consultants draw tables and graph with simple 2x2 tables or 3x2 tables or one graph in which everything is put in and then they explain, because they want to, your ability to simplify things is very, very important. Right? You need to be highly adaptable and deal with constant change. You know that 3 months in one project, 3 months in another project, one sector, different sector, India, maybe abroad. So your ability to quickly switch gears from one thing to another and handle this change is very, very important. Right? Most important thing, work-life balance does not exist because you're usually there where the client is. So 5 days a week, you might be working from the client's place, and then for the weekend, you fly back to your place. So flight and travel, those are not a problem. Every weekend, you will fly back to wherever your family is, but you'll be seeing your family only on the weekends, right? So there'll be a lot of constant travel. There won't be any work-life balance. And it's one of those things, again, where the work comes first. So there might be cases where you have to put even some very, very important personal engagements like a marriage and the family also aside, because this is the project that you need to work on at that point of time, right? So it is like that, where the firm becomes more important than anything else in your life, right? So that becomes very, very important. And the last thing they want is they also look for something. As part of the interview process, they look for something called engagement quotient. What is engagement quotient? So there is a round called a dinner round for McKinsey where you sit and a senior person, partner or somebody comes and they have dinner with you, right? They're not going to interview you. It's not an interview, just having dinner. You might think, so why would somebody just have to have dinner for an interview? Because realize that when you're meeting a CEO and you're working with these people, you are not necessarily at every single time, they are not going to ask, Acha, how is the work happening right now? What is happening? Do you tell me exactly? So they know that they've hired McKinsey and McKinsey will present their report when they're this thing. In the middle, whenever they meet you, they'll have a chat. They need to like you. Your ability to not talk work, sit and have a cup of tea with somebody and still be interesting and still be engaging is very crucial for them to like you. Because if the client likes you, then they will also take whatever suggestions you give them, right? So ability to develop a quick connection, ability to just sit, chat, talk about, everything under the sun. That's very, very important. So I remember, why? Because the people at the top management, they're not always, so they're very, very busy. But you need to be able to connect with them and have a chat with them in the 5 minutes that you have with them. So which is why they look for this thing called very, very high engagement quotient. So it's one of those things where they show, right? So suppose if the hero is like this assassin or a ninja, it is not like he or she can be like a machine, right? They also need to charm people, right, when in the particular role. So, which is why this is maybe the most, demanding, what you call, interview process, at least, or the sector in terms of, the selection of people, right? So that's consulting, for you. Now that we've covered everything, how do you build a knowledge base, for this? So the first thing, in terms of a to-do list, you know what is important and what is not important. Now, one of the things I want to tell you is, suppose you're already working. That means, what are the things you cannot change? 10th marks, 12th marks, graduation marks, you cannot change that right now, right? So don't start worrying after you've seen this in terms of, oh, that means I won't get this, oh, 998, this, that. So don't start worrying about that. What you cannot change, there is no point worrying about that. Only focus on the things that you can change. If you're in college and you've seen that, okay, academics are important, try to get the best grades that you can. If you're in college or at work, you're rather, okay, extracurriculars and positions of responsibility are important, try to work on that. So don't focus on the things you can't change, right? Or your graduation, college brand or anything. Focus on the things you can change. So this is just these two videos is just an introduction to give you an overview, at least broadly, what do recruiters look for, what are the skills, and what sort of a resume this thing. No detailed idea of what is investment banking, what are the different disciplines. IMS, we have a future you series. If you go to the IMS India YouTube channel, Management Studies IMS India YouTube channel, you go there, you will see that, go to the playlist, you'll see a playlist called Future You. Here, what we've done is, we've done interviews with different people in each sector. So you will meet like an investment banker with 2 years of work experience, and you'll meet somebody at a super senior level, right? So any area that you choose, that you want to actually listen to the people and find out about the kind of work that they do and everything, this Future You series is the best series for you to learn more about the job from people who are working in that field, right? My understanding also will not be as in-depth as theirs, right? So that is one. Next is learning more about each specializations. I want to know a bit more about marketing. What will be the subjects be like? What will the subjects be like? Or what I want to learn a bit more about, finance and some of those things. So you look at this thing called, in my book, I have a chapter called Preparing for an MBA and Not Just the CAT. In that, I've listed different books from which you can learn, about each of these areas. If you want to learn more from an academic perspective, if you want to learn. Another great way to look at is actually taking up a certification course. You take up a certification course on Coursera or Udemy from offered by a good college, not necessarily a long course, but a short course with some sort of a certificate that you would get, but from a good college. In Coursera, for example, Wharton offers courses which are fundamentals of marketing or fundamentals of finance and stuff. So those can be pretty good. Those can be pretty good as well. So either the books or the certification courses or both. Now, the third thing you need to do is start building your profile for the specialization you choose. Now, how to build your profile also, that's a chapter in the book, how to build your profile for an MBA. Now, if you look at something like a certification course, it does both things for you. It helps you learn more out of the specialization as well as, build your profile for that. Yeah. So look at it from that angle. Don't look at a certification course from the fact that, okay, if I have certification course, it's a checkbox and they'll give me. So don't look at it from that aspect. It's not like a checkbox. Like, okay, they're not counting, okay, this person has a certification, this person doesn't. When they have a conversation with you, they need to know that you have invested and learned about the career that you'd want to build. That's what they're looking at. And obviously, if you want to make the transition from being a student or a working professional to being a management professional, the most important thing is to read international business publications. The most important word in MBA is what? It's not M, which is masters. It's not A, which is administration, but it is B, which is business. Now, how do you understand business? Are you waiting that finally you will go into an MBA, then they'll teach you everything that you need to know about business, and then after that, you'll get into a job and then learn? No, right? You need to start knowing about it right now. So the best way to look at is, there are a couple of these international business publications and national as well. Economist, Forbes, Bloomberg, they're international. You can choose one of them, whichever style you like. right? So either Economist or Forbes or Bloomberg, or even say Financial Times, FT or Wall Street Journal. So out of Economist, Forbes, Bloomberg, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, choose one. Any one, whichever you like. Overall, it can be your choice. For Indian businesses, definitely, I think Ken is a wonderful publication. So it's buying a subscription for that will be worth it, because it's not like a news thing. They take one particular event or one particular sector and they do a long story analysis. So I think they do not more than a story a day. So I think it's fantastic if you're really keen about learning. Most of my colleagues and a lot of people genuinely like the kind of content that Ken produces. So Ken is there. If you're interested in tech, then Wired magazine is something that you should go through. This is a to-do list for you in terms of, say, what you need to know, right? So as I said at the beginning, I hope this video, these two videos helped you understand, okay, these are the kind of career options that are there. And more importantly, what is aligned to you. Right? It might be that you're not still certain. Obviously, just by two videos, you might not understand. Use all of these resources that I've listed to learn more about, and then get started in terms of building your profile. Right? I hope this was useful, and I hope you decide your career path in terms of which specialization you want to choose well before you begin your MBA. Right? Thank you.